On this episode, we're welcoming Zack Kelly. We're going to be talking about heart rate variability, force plates and their impact on injury prevention, as well as wearable technology and how to use it and when to use it. Zack, welcome back to the Totem Wellness Podcast. It's been almost a year now since you were here last. We talked about force plate stuff. We talked about MVO2, and obviously you are in the education of helping clients and yourself and your kids now with some data input. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit more. We're going to talk about HRV. We're going to talk a little bit more on the force plate and some of the what's evolved since we last spoke. There's always
a lot
evolution.
has changed.
There's always
we
evolution.
really needed you here because after you left, we did a whole bunch of things. And now we're more confused than ever.
Well, and we both got these
confusing landscape,
ultra-human rings, which are, there's Aura, there's ultra-human, there's lots of different options of this now.
Hilo.
Yeah.
Where it's just providing us all this information. So we'll get to that. We'll save that for our last piece. But I think what we should do is start on HRV, which the three of us, being in the industry for a long time, we know what it is. We understand it. Generally speaking, not like you do. So this for the two of us is actually really interesting because we've got a couple of months under our belt of getting this HRV data that we didn't have before.
Yeah.
And trying to understand what is it, why is it important? And maybe that's a good spot to dive in.
Give us the scoop.
What is it?
What is it?
Yeah, totally. This is what I did my master's in, and so my research was in HRV. Basically, HRV, and they're in all of these devices now, which is useful, but also, takes some time to learn how to interpret. So heart rate variability basically is measuring your vagus nerve function, and your vagus nerve connects your brain to your heart and lungs. And it's really what drives parasympathetic tone, which is the rest and digest end of the nervous system, right? So it's not as good at interpreting sympathetic tone, but it is pretty good at understanding rest and digest, right? Like how well, you're recovering, basically, what your stress is like. And that's why these devices have exploded, because now all of a sudden we can monitor stress. We can monitor stress, cognitive stress that's coming in, and how the general load that it's taking on your body, and how that accumulates when you're adding it all in with respect to your training program, with respect to your life, and all of that. So that's what heart rate variability is. And basically, just to get into the little bit more detail around it, the heart doesn't actually beat like a metronome. If your heart rate is 60 beats per minute, it actually doesn't beat dun 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 in one beat per second. It kind of beats dun 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 dun. So there's this like gap and difference in the heart rate as it goes. And so that is what heart rate variability is measuring. That gap, that gap and the difference between beats is actually a measure of autonomic function, specifically that vagal tone or parasympathetic. Well,
and the higher the number, so if you get a high HRV score, that's a good thing.
This is where it's tricky to interpret. Yes.
I'm so happy we're having this conversation.
This is very tricky, because this is where a lot of the algorithms and some of the devices are getting it wrong, right? Because sometimes, ultra high HRV can actually be a sign that your body's really trying to recover. So sometimes when, like, some of my clients, say, for example, are about to get sick or fight off a virus, they'll have these record high heart rate variability scores, right? And
That's so interesting.
In reality, they're not plummeting, they're coming up. And so it's actually, what we want is not too high, not too low. And it really matters as a sort of relative function, right? It's basically, it can be very useful looking at the big picture long term. Like, hey, what does my month of December look like?
My normal. Right?
What does my month of December look like? Man, my HRV over the whole month was so much lower than July, when I was, relaxed.
Interesting.
It was better.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And then, on a micro scale, on a weekly scale, hey, I had a really tough week of training or work. man, my HRV's in the dumps. I actually need to, focus on recovery a little bit more, right? So movement is good, right? And one of the things that
Movement of the HRV.
yeah, movement of the HRV is good. We want to get stressed. We want to see it go down, especially sometimes when you're training and you're in a hard training program. You actually want to see that HRV come down and then recover, right? And come down in certain stints and then recover. One of the things that can happen, and that's not often talked about in these devices, or it's really sort of, you need clinical practice to understand, is that you can also get a little bit of a blunted HRV response. And it's common in clinical populations that are from depression to eating disorders
Wow.
to anorexia, where the HRV stays the same always. So there's no sign of stress.
So interesting.
No sign of hiking, consistent. And so the subjective experience is really quite poor, but you're getting an HRV score that's great. They're saying you're golden, right? So
yes.
That's so interesting.
now that not all our viewers or people listening are going to need to know that, because it's probably in 20% of the population, maybe, right? It caused a great deal of headache in my research, but
Sure.
Understanding that was like, and it helped me, I've had clients that go through this, right? That have had this level of blunted stress response. So we want to see range. We want to see the HRV go down. We want to see it go up. And on a micro scale, like what it's really useful for is, hey, I had 3 drinks last night, alcoholic drinks. My HRV is in the complete dumps today.
Right.
So it teaches you the behaviors that squash your recovery, right? Hey, I read before bed for a week and my HRV is up, right? So you learning that, you tend to learn the tools on how to start to regulate it a little bit more, how to start to, when it goes down for a week, what are the things, the saunas, the cold plunges, the baths, what are the things that actually help you bring it back up? What are the things, for me, like I love meditation, that helps. I love sauna, cold plunging, that helps. Sometimes it's, reducing your schedule. Sometimes it's, it's throttling back a little bit, right?
Is this something like, we understand it from the physical activity standpoint, the hard physical training. If you're an executive that really doesn't work out very much, but you have a high stress job, whatever that job is it applicable to that too? Does that drive?
It's totally applicable. Now, the decision making is around the scores is tricky, because you're an executive, you got to go do a presentation and your HRV's in the dumps. Doesn't matter. You're going to do the presentation, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in the physical fitness world, we may pull you out of a workout, right?
Right.
Or change the workout.
Or
to
change
a
the workout
recovery.
to a recovery workout, right? So the decision making is like, hey, you're in the dumps here. How long do you want to go like this before we plan a recovery stint, right? Like, how long can we be trending in this downward direction, right?
Yeah.
So big picture, looking at monthly trends is very helpful. Little picture from day to day, looking at, certain behaviors that help improve it, certain behaviors that help, that actually cause it to go down, and how you can then start to mold your schedule into, better regulating your score, which then is going to help you in the long run manage your workload better, right? You're going to be able to perform better long term, right? You're going to avoid injury more. You're going to, avoid mental injury more as well, like avoid burnout, right? Because that's another sign. Like when you get that blunted stress response that's common in depression, I think that's very highly related to what burnout feels like. So you get some people that have these stuck, scores that are really good and high, and they're not moving, and they can't really, they can't. But the symptom is like, I feel like crap, like I'm toast. I've got no energy, right? It's constantly, fighting with themselves to get stuff done. So that's where, you have to be careful interpreting this stuff, because some of the algorithms that are scoring these things just have no clue that that is a thing, and they'll tell you green is go all the
Sure.
time, right?
Sure.
Or they won't even say too high is not good. Some algorithms are good where they say, you know, hey, your HRV is super high, pay attention. But some don't even look at, like, high is good. Well, you scored a record high, right?
Right.
And that's not necessarily a good thing. So
This is such an important conversation. And I think people are throwing this word HRV around
yeah,
without a really good understanding of what it really is.
Yeah.
And after you explained it to me, I'm relating it more to recovery. Does that make sense to you in a simple
totally.
term?
Yeah, it's definitely more like, you know, useful in understanding how to recover. You know, it's also, you know, because there's that classic saying in the strength and conditioning world, there's no such thing as overtraining, just under recovery, right?
Right.
And so, you know, some people are just great at tolerating high workloads and stress, and others could use the help with these devices to understand a little bit more. I find I use it a bit more for the recovery piece than anything else.
It's a really important thing for all of us to think about, because I'm picturing too, I know now with some of these wearables, people are joining groups and they're competing on heart rate recovery.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think they really understand what the
No.
numbers mean.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they understand what it's about, in the way that recovery is kind of the opposite. We don't really live in a world where we say, I recover better than you do, right?
Yeah.
And it's a mindset, and we all know how important recovery is. But I think this idea of competing on HRV is not the right way for us to look at it. I think we
Totally.
should look at, you know, a healthy system is a system with a lot of variety and a lot of adaptability.
Autonomic adaptability or autonomic flexibility, that we need that range of response to deal with stress and to deal with challenge, right? We need to be able to get stressed at times. And if you're competing, and I made these mistakes personally, always trying to get, you know, good HRV scores, and you know,
we're kind of in that right now.
Yeah, like you're wanting to get, you know, good HRV scores, and it's not necessarily the thing. It's only a piece of the puzzle. Like, we want to know what it is, but we just want to monitor it a little bit, not, you know, make it competitive. Or competing scores between people there's so much range.
Sense.
No, in what scores are like, right? So
And individualized.
And each
too.
person's heart rate.
Each
I'm
person's
noticing
heart
that
rate,
too. I feel like the devices, I'm super interested in them. I feel that they haven't really caught up with individual variability. And it's interesting with Tim and I, because Tim is a genetically cardio gifted human being.
We hate Tim.
We hate Tim. Don't ever go for a jog or a run with him. I'm the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm power.
Fast
I'm
twitch,
sprints, fast twitch. My numbers look very different and my heart rate is very different. I hate activity that requires a lot of oxygen, but that's just how I'm built.
Yeah.
I love something that's fast and let me rest for 2 minutes.
Totally.
And that's how I'm built.
Yeah.
And our scores are going to be different because of that. But it doesn't, I don't think, mean that one's really bad and one's really good. It's different right now. And I think the technology hasn't really caught up to those differences in individuals.
Yeah. And it's way better to, I had the chance to listen to some of your podcast episodes of recent, and listen to you talking to Chris Robertson. And I was like, and he said this line where comparison is the thief of joy.
Oh,
and I was like,
so good.
Bang, like that is so true.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you know, that comparison across people, it ends up just, you know, you lose sight of what's actually important. And, you know, in reality, you know, it just should be just informative to the individual. And it's very difficult to make comparisons across people. Now, I will say that the big, huge data suggest high, like, and a big super zoom out, large data suggest high values are better for mortality and long-term health. But, you know, that, like, I just put that on the back burner. You know, I don't think people should make their goal to be having a higher HRV, because it essentially should be get fitter, and my HRV will actually increase as I get fitter, right? It will naturally increase.
I love that.
So, but in the process, you're going to have lower HRV days to get fitter.
Yeah.
Right?
I've got two questions on the sort of the baseline. So we're trying to understand what our baseline is for HRV. We probably need 2 to 4 weeks of, call it normal. I'm not sick. I've got my normal sort of workload stress, normal sort of workload for training. And I'm doing that for 2 to 4 weeks. And that gives me sort of a range of my
scores.
Typical HRV score for me individually. Is that fair to say?
Pretty accurate, yeah.
And then you talked about, you know, having a couple of drinks. Well, presumably, you know, if I ran 10K in the morning and then worked all day, had a presentation, and then I went out for drinks, that's probably not the best time to get an indication, do those drinks have an impact? It should be I've had a normal day, nothing that I did today should swing my score one way or the other. I'm gonna have a couple of drinks and see how it affects me.
Exactly, yeah. Those other things are confounding variables, right? You're adding too many stuff in at once. And so, so it is a good idea to, you know, to, when you're looking at that and seeing how behaviors manipulate your score, to only change one variable at a time, right? Just kind of get in your routine. And then, if you throw too much at it at once, then it's hard to decipher what
understandably.
worked and what didn't.
Okay. So I think anything else on HRV?
That's great. That was huge. I'm still processing a lot of new things.
We want to touch a little bit on back to the force plate.
Okay.
We got into it pretty good the last conversation that we had, which I think is really good info there. So if anybody that's listening hasn't watched that episode or listened to that episode, go back to last season and look for Zack. But now Stace just got back from
We're
Altus.
very experienced on it now.
We both have recently read this book, Ballistic, which is this guy. He's a sports writer who went to this group called P3 out of Santa Barbara, and they do all this force plate testing.
They use it for many, many different types of predictions. With mostly, I think a lot of it is based on NBA players and the ability of a force plate to predict serious injury in the season.
Right.
And now they are using it regularly, testing these NBA players throughout the season, which is interesting, and some controversy about that. The part that was interesting that I think applies to all of us is they are also saying that we could use the force plates to predict a lot more injuries, including low back pain, when we're looking at imbalances side to side, including chronic types of injuries. You're going to become a marathon runner and you have something going on. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I definitely think, again, it's a piece of the puzzle, especially with the back pain thing. You know, I think I've studied a lot of DNS, and you've had people talk about dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. I've studied postural restoration institute techniques and stuff like that. And I find that, you know, the big thing that I see with back pain is it's complex, and sometimes there's psychological elements to it. But from a biomechanical standpoint, you know, sometimes you can get people with that sort of open scissor posture, right? We've talked about the rib flare, the pelvis tilted forward. So on a force plate, what you'll see when you see that, it's quite often is either from a balance perspective, a lot of weight in the forward, a lot of weight in the heels, right? Another thing that can tend to happen is when we just do the quiet standalone, and Tim, you're a perfect example of this. When we did yours, you were putting way more weight into one side.
This is what you guys made fun of me last episode on.
Than the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I've recently measured it. It's perfect now.
I'm sure it is. like everything. We'll talk about
Like
perfect
everything.
a little more
Yeah.
later. But yeah, the that shifting from
That's interesting.
from one side to another, it really, you start to understand, how force is translating through the body. And I've heard this saying in the strength and conditioning world is that you can't fire a cannon from a canoe, right? And your hips are cannons and they're attached to your torso, right? And if your torso is a canoe, your hips are going to get pointed in different directions.
Like wobbly, right?
Exactly.
Wobbly.
Yeah. When I say canoe, I mean like an unstable surface, right? And so if your core is not in a good position, your legs are going to start to, there's going to start to be large asymmetries through it, right? Another thing that I like to look at when it's, either predicting back pain or, looking with a back pain client is, and this goes for a lot of different conditions, but is hamstring strength, right? You put people on the force plates on a laying on the floor position, and you're testing their hamstrings and how hard they can dig into the plates.
Cool.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I've noticed an unbelievable amount in my practice of weakness in the hamstrings, and in this position, an asymmetrical weakness, right? Where people then, that upstream at the pelvis, what that's doing is, okay, your pelvis is twisted and now you're out of alignment, right? And we can see that from the force plate data.
That is so cool. That is something that I would imagine affects so many people as soon as you hit probably age 30 and over. I know in myself, I can feel actually on my hamstrings that one side is totally atrophied.
Yeah.
And I don't have time to even deal with what it is.
Yeah.
I'm sure on the force plate, it would be fascinating. And I didn't even know that you could do that type of testing. And that was what was so interesting about this book is I didn't realize the force plate had that much variability in movement testing. I thought it was single leg, vertical, double leg, vertical. You had me doing push-ups when we did our advanced testing protocol at Totem about a few months ago. Tell me about the push-ups too. What are we looking at?
So what we're looking at with that test specifically is there's some good evidence that actually shows connections with longevity and push-up scores, right? So, we're going to look at, okay, leg power is correlated well with longevity, right? And so that's a good lower body measure,
right?
Which is just your just general ability to jump high. Very, very good predictor of preventing falls, of living a longer, healthier life. And the same thing is true for the upper body push-up score. There's some really good evidence to suggest that higher scores are better for longevity. Now, we are also looking at, hey, is one side way off, right? Is one side, way weaker than the other? What's going on there? Because that can predict an injury. I had a guy come through, do this test, and he kind of went off and did his own thing, and we saw a big deficit in the left shoulder in a push-up test. And I'm like, okay, well, we should probably work on this a little bit. And he wanted to try and work it himself. And I got a message, I guess, 18 months later. Yeah, I had it surgically repaired.
Wow.
And I was kind of like, I didn't want to say I told you so, because that's rude, and you want to be very client focused, but it was like, okay, well,
You were like, score for the force plate.
we did predict
knew.
this was coming.
So
we
it was
knew
an
it was
injury
coming.
prediction that ended up happening.
That ended up happening, right? And so and that's happened. I've had a few of those already with hamstring tears and hamstring tendinopathy, weakness in the hamstring, left to right comparable. And these
would be
predictors,
a really good test.
Yeah, they're not always perfect depending on what the sport or what someone's doing, right? But I think if you have a person who wants to push, whether it be in athletics or just for longevity and doing better, you want to know what needs to be cleaned up, right? You want to know what needs to be focused on.
Well,
right?
and like Stace said, people who are generally active over long periods of time, they usually know that something's off a little bit, but it's not painful, right? So why
You
would
just
they
work
address
through
it? You just know, like I, as we're talking about this, I don't know, there's like 5 things for me that I should probably be more aware of and how I should train for those things. And I want to just touch base on my sort of off balance stance. So, but I have a foot thing that has been going on for like 2 years.
Okay.
Right. That Waj here helped me identify what the problem was.
Okay.
It's still not completely resolved, but it's from 50% to probably about 90% now. Okay. And I'm really curious, was that part of my problem back then? And I didn't even think about it.
We need to test you again.
It's entirely possible. Like, I think I've seen that happen. I've seen like people, the same thing with the back to the back pain piece and having stance like you heavy on one side predict like SI joint
Of
issues,
course.
Right? Like you're
Makes
just
perfect sense.
you're
You're
just
always on that
chronically
side.
jamming that one side SI joint, and the SI interacts with the ankle, right? And so there is, if it was on that side, it
Same
does.
side,
Yeah. So in your case, it predicted it. It's not. We want to look for the red herring, the easy prediction, where it's like this score perfectly predicts that.
Yeah.
In reality, it's not like that.
Yeah.
It's let's do a couple tests. Let's see where we really have to pay attention, and if we see any real red flags. A certain amount of difference is acceptable.
Yeah.
A certain amount of difference you really have to address. Like when you start getting beyond 15% difference between sides, you really want to you want to address that. And whether that be with the respect to the hips, spine, back, shoulders, it's something you want to clean up. Like 6% is the gold standard, 6% and under of difference between the limbs. Start getting above 15%. You better have a sport that specifically wants you to do that and playing at a high level, like a pitcher or something like that. That's okay. We can allow them to get beyond that.
Yeah.
But you better know what you're doing and why you're doing it at that point. Once you start getting beyond that 15% range, right? So
that's such good advice. So in the book, they had an NBA player, and he was young, into his early years, and he had a foot injury that was healed and treated, and he had therapy for it, but they were doing the landing test, so landing from a height, and he would never put that heel down on the force plate.
Right.
And as you can imagine, that data would show up huge, that one foot is taking all the weight. And what was so interesting about that was they were able to change it, and they were able to train him to say, okay, you've got to strengthen, you've probably got to lengthen that Achilles a little bit, like get used to that foot hitting the ground. Probably the bone density was less in that foot and it didn't feel the same as the other side. But that's such an interesting thing that would have never been discovered had he not been on the force plate, because you can't see it. All these things happen too fast. It's not with our trained eye that we can see this. And then in Henry Abbott's case, what was so interesting about what he said at the end when he summarized it all is he said, I saw sport med physicians, I had MRIs, I went to multiple therapists, massage, acupuncture, everything. And he said, had I not done the force plate, I would have never figured out how to fix my low back pain. And he was at the point of extreme debilitating low back pain. And we've all seen that before. That really interferes with your life and it's awful. And if you can find a way to move beyond that, you'll do anything to move beyond it.
Yeah, totally. And it's basically, it's interesting in the outside of previous injury being the leader predictor of future injury. These force plates are really good at us kind of detecting what's coming, right? And in that, what we're really doing is changing movement as well, and it's not always necessarily what is entirely visible on the outside. Sometimes there's a difference of sequence of muscles and how they're firing on the inside, and that's gonna, express into the plate, right? And so that's gonna show up when you're in your force generation strategy, right? And you're gonna start to be able to detect those differences and figure out, where you should definitely make some changes.
You need that data and then be able to interpret it and make appropriate changes.
Totally.
And speaking of that, back to data.
Yes.
So back to the wearable technology, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've discovered with this ring is I know that it's primarily a recovery device.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't do the job that my Garmin watch does, which is way better for tracking and
For GPS.
GPS related things, like way better. But I find when I go into it, and I'm a knowledgeable person, there's just so much information there. It's like, and I can zero in on one thing that, okay, I'm just going to pay attention to this thing. But I also needed a bit of a break from it. Even after using it for a couple of months, I'm like, I just need to take like a bit of time off from this and not pay attention to it.
Totally.
Is that something that you're finding with clients, whether they're general population or athletes?
Totally. And, I think there's two real factors that happen with respect to all this data and health data that we're collecting. Two real caveats on warnings on how we should proceed with it. One is just the sheer overwhelm, right? If you are looking at all of this data, it's more mental load, right? It is more work on your mind to try and make sense of all of this, which inevitably stresses you out more.
It's going to mess with your HRV.
Yeah, it unfortunately ends up, causing more harm than good, right?
And screen time.
And screen time, right? Exactly. So there's just the sheer overwhelm that it can cause. But secondly, and this is kind of ties a little bit about what we saw in the research that I wasn't necessarily a part of it at my lab, but it came out right at the lab I'm a member of at York. In the research we were doing, it's basically, this concept of perfectionism and maladaptive perfectionism, and what we saw in that the experiments we were doing up there was basically that it was a meditation experiment, and we were looking at seeing how regular individuals would respond to meditation and how individuals with maladaptive perfectionism would respond to meditation. And what we found was that individuals with maladaptive perfectionism or high perfectionism traits took the cues and actually got more stressed out during the meditation. So and you see this in an athletic world sometimes where, say a hockey player grips the stick too tight, or, people are just working so hard, they just can't play loose. They can't, get into it. And so that's one bit of warning that I kind of look at when looking at this data, because I think that anyone who's interested in this health data or wearing one of these things from a start and or listening to podcasts and being in our world already has some level of perfectionism, already has some level of I want overachiever, right? I want more, right? And so, there's some really robust data around perfectionism, and just to say, I'm sure I have some of it. I've have clients, that's been my practice. I've been lucky enough to work with executives, CEOs. They're high performers, driven, ultra high perfectionism levels, but it's paid off for them, right? They've really done really well, because there's parts of perfectionism that are great. But as the interesting data that came out in 2019, a meta-analysis looked at 40 years of perfectionism. And what it saw was, as you get older, perfectionism tends to erode and neuroticism tends to develop. And that is that it's just that more rigidity around it, right? It's that more, grabbing too tightly, looking too hard at the data, right? Really not being able to take space from it. And I think that is probably the thing we have to be careful of, is really having a good relationship with that data, taking breaks from it, not looking at it every day, allowing your coach or someone else to look at your data for you so that you're not overwhelmed, gripping too tight, wanting to change things, wanting to, improve. So you have some sort of a strategy where it's like, hey, maybe I'm getting too close to this. Maybe this is actually, too overwhelming. Maybe it's actually now doing the exact opposite of what I wanted and intended it to. I'm too hyper-focused on my sleep, and now I can't sleep anymore, right? I'm too hyper.
Good point.
I'm too hyper focused on my HRV, and it starts getting worse. Because
so they turn into the meditation competition.
Exactly, right.
Which probably there shouldn't be a meditation competition.
No,
I think it's super interesting that you yourself did research on this, because you, for a big chunk of your life, have been immersed in the hard science, the hard data part of it.
Yeah.
And then to weave meditation in is incredibly insightful, because you're saying that there's a health impact to these numbers that we're probably not aware of yet, because this is all very new to us, and that certain personalities are going to have a different reaction, which is such an insightful way to look at this data. And I think it's something that needs to be a part of the conversation, because let's face it, like many things, these devices are being sold to us.
Yeah.
So a lot of the noise around the devices is from people who are influencers or who are hired to convince us that we have to have these devices, that we have to have this information. And we're also a part of this science world, and we're looking at performance, and we're testing these things. And in some ways, we're part of the problem. We're telling people, don't walk around with all your weight on one foot. You got to be at a force plate. You got to understand this. But we all need to step back sometimes and look at what's the motivation. The motivation is, I want to be healthier. I want to feel better.
Yeah.
And that sometimes it can interfere.
Yeah, totally. If you have that tendency to, want to push a bit more and a bit harder, then, and I think if you're getting these tests or, invested in getting these wearables, you're already kind of likely chance that you're more driven, you're more perfectionist, you're already kind of in that population. And so, cause I know people that are just, I don't really care, right? They're not interested at all, right? And they just don't have they're not invested, right? And so knowing that is a potential negative, I think is helpful to allow you a strategy to keep space from it, allow you, a strategy to kind of maybe allow a coach to help you, right?
I agree. That's what I was thinking when you were talking. Is consult someone like you who actually knows what the data means, especially before you stress about it.
Totally.
Know what you're looking at, understand the data, know what pieces are the most important for you, for your lifestyle, know when to look at it. Maybe it's a weekend thing only. And then you're not wasting time freaking out about the numbers during the week when you've got your full work week and your kids and all these things going on.
That's so true. And I forget the name of the tennis athlete who there was some news around this where this pro athlete was working with a coach and, just had a newborn. He was up all night, right? He was up all night. His Whoop score was tanked in the dumps, right? And, it was like, how do I interpret this? I already know I had a terrible night, right? I already know I sucked. So do I even pay attention to this? Probably not today. I'm going to go out there and try and focus
Do your best.
And that's what this athlete did, and they ended up winning. I got to we'll research who that was. I forget the name, but that's exactly sort of the mindset is like, don't look at every day, big picture, how to, make small decisions based on it. And then you can kind of have a good relationship with it because.
Okay. My last question is, I don't know if you've got any states, but my last question is, how many things should somebody focus on at once? And what are those top ones in your opinion?
Me personally, when I'm working with a client, I'm trying to improve one variable at a time and putting everything else on maintenance. Now, So what I'm looking at with a client, like let's say we're trying to get their cardiovascular fitness better, I'll look at a couple interesting data points at the time they show up every single week, if this particular client is doing a good job tracking. So what I'll do is I'll look at their heart rate variability in the context of the week and the context of maybe the last 6 months, right? So I'll kind of see, how stressed is this person prior to their training session. Then I'll look at, how hard their relative effort. So how much has their training increased in the last week relative to the last month, relative to the last year, right? So if I'm, for example, seeing someone's training decrease, but they're also getting super stressed and their heart rate variability is decreasing, some warning signs are kind of going off. Another thing that I look at with clients is, to touch to this blunting response a little bit, is I want to see what a client's heart rate responsiveness is after the warm up at the same workload, and let's call it watts, right? Because that's an easy one to track. You put someone on a bike or a rower or a runner, and let's say it's 150 watts at time point 10 minutes. What is your heart rate, right? So if you come in with a heart rate of 120 at 150 watts after you've done, a 10-minute warm up, right? What is that? If that heart rate is consistently at 120 at that end of that warm up for the same amount of watts, then we go, okay, that's good. If it's, 20 beats higher or 20 beats lower, then we got to start asking questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is going on here? And this happens. And if you want to experiment, another experiment is go have a couple drinks, track this over a few weeks.
Get on the bike,
do the same amount of watts.
A stationary bike.
The morning after, and you'll see your heart rate is going to go through the roof for the same amount of watts, right? And so, that tells you the heart rate responsiveness. That tells me what I'm really seeing in an individual. And I like to connect that to how an individual is feeling, like their rate of perceived exertion, right? So, hey, if you are in the dumps and your heart rate is tanking and you can't get the heart rate up after time point 10 minutes, and you're like, say you're at 100 or 90 for the same amount of watts and it's dropped over the weeks, then I'll look back and go, well, what's your HRV doing? Is that dumped as well? And what was your stress like this week? What was your training like? If all those things are kind of trending in the wrong direction, we'll go, okay, time to back off. We need to do a lighter effort.
This is where your meditation expertise is going to come in handy.
Yes.
You're going to be like, lie down on the mat. I got you. Okay. Yeah. I love this. I'm going to look at all these numbers a lot differently. I'm going to calm the hell down.
Impossible.
I get a big number every day on mine that says that my age is actually older than my real age. And I have to be the bigger person to not let it piss me off every day. But anyhow, thank you, Zach. That was phenomenal.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, look forward to next year. We'll be back on.
Got it.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Totem Wellness Podcast. Please follow us on Apple, Google, or Spotify and leave a 5-star review and comment. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, and please spread the word to family and friends.